I worked 43 years without missing a single mortgage payment. Every paycheck, I put a little money aside for retirement. By the time I turned 71, I'd saved $842,000. I wasn't rich. That money was simply my future, my medicine, my home, and the promise I made to my late wife that I'd never become a burden to anyone. One Monday morning, I logged into my retirement account to pay a hospital bill. The balance on my screen read $27.14. I thought the bank's website had crashed. Then I opened the transaction history. 12 transfers. Every dollar gone. I called my son Daniel. He answered on the second ring. Before I could say a word, he calmly said, "Dad, I was going to tell you. I borrowed it. My company needed the money. I'll pay you back after the investors come in." I couldn't breathe. 43 years of work, gone in less than a week. But that wasn't the moment that changed my life. An hour later, the bank manager closed his office door, looked me straight in the eyes, whispered, "Mr. Carter, your son stole the wrong account." I stared at him. He slowly slid one sealed envelope across the desk. Daniel didn't know I'd been protecting one final secret for over 25 years. My name is Thomas Carter. I'm 71 years old. For 43 years, I served as a firefighter in Cedar Ridge, Colorado. People used to call me brave. The truth is, I was simply a man who always believed one thing. If you protect your family, one day they'll protect you. I believed that until the morning I looked at my retirement account. The screen showed $27.14. For almost a full minute, I just stared. My reading glasses slipped down my nose. I refreshed the page, then again, then a third time. Nothing changed. $842,000. Reduced to $27.14. I whispered to myself, "No, this has to be a mistake." My hands began shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone. I immediately called customer service. After answering security questions, the woman on the line grew strangely quiet. "Mr. Carter, the transfers were authorized from your online banking profile." "Authorized?" "Yes, sir. 12 separate transfers over the last 6 days. I didn't authorize anything." "I understand, sir. But according to our records, someone logged in using your username, your password, and your two-factor verification code." I felt my stomach tighten. Only one person knew all of that. My son, Daniel. 2 years earlier, after my knee replacement surgery, I'd asked him to help me set up online banking. "Dad," he'd laughed, "you'll never remember all these passwords." So he'd written everything down, then saved it in his password manager, just in case. I trusted him. Why wouldn't I? He was my only child. His mother, Susan, had died 9 years earlier after a long battle with ovarian cancer. The night before she passed, she squeezed my hand and whispered, "Take care of Daniel. He'll always need his dad." Promised her. And I'd spent the last 9 years keeping that promise. Whenever Daniel's truck broke down, I paid. When his daughter Sophie needed braces, I paid. When his business struggled during COVID, I quietly loaned him $50,000. He promised to repay every cent. He never did. But I never mentioned it again, because he was my son. Family wasn't supposed to keep score. At least, That's what I believed. I pressed Daniel's contact. He answered almost immediately. "Morning, Dad." His voice sounded calm, too calm. "Daniel, my retirement account is empty." Silence, just 2 seconds. Then he sighed. "I was hoping you'd notice after Friday." Frowned. "What does that mean?" "Dad, I borrowed the money." "Borrowed." The word echoed inside my head. "You borrowed my retirement." "My investors backed out. I had no choice. I just needed a few months. I'll put everything back." I stood up so quickly my chair fell backward. "You took $800,000 without asking me." I wasn't stealing it. I was protecting my future. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "No, you were protecting yours. What happens if I need surgery tomorrow? What happens if I need long-term care?" He didn't answer. Instead, he quietly said, "You've got your pension. You'll be okay." Those 6 words hurt more than losing the money. Because for the first time, I realized my own son had already decided how much my future was worth. $27.14. I hung up without another word. An hour later, I walked into First Mountain National Bank carrying nothing but my ID and 43 years of trust that had just been shattered. I had no idea that before I walked out of that building, everything I believed about my own family was about to change forever. The lobby of First Mountain National Bank looked exactly the same as it had for years. Same marble floors, same grandfather clock, same smiling receptionist. Only this time, nothing felt familiar. I walked to the customer service desk. "My name is Thomas Carter. I need to speak with someone immediately." The young woman smiled politely. "Of course, Mr. Carter. Please have a seat." Less than 5 minutes later, a man in a navy blue suit stepped into the lobby. He looked to be in his late 50s. "Mr. Carter, I'm James Holloway, the branch manager. I understand there's an issue with your retirement account." I nodded. "There certainly is." James led me into his office and quietly closed the door. He pulled my account onto his computer. For several moments he said nothing. His expression slowly changed. Concern, confusion, then disbelief. Finally he looked at me. "Mr. Carter, did you personally approve these transfers?" "No, not one of them." He turned the monitor toward me. 12 wire transfers, each one just under $70,000, each sent to the same company. Carter Horizon Development, LLC. I stared at the name. Daniel's business. My own son hadn't even tried to hide it. James took a slow breath. "Your son?" I nodded. He admitted it. He said he borrowed the money. James leaned back in his chair. "I've worked in banking for 32 years. I've seen strangers steal from strangers. I've seen business partners destroy each other. But," he paused, "it's always harder when it's family." He printed several pages. "Legally, you have options. You can report this immediately. It could become a criminal investigation." I looked down at the papers. Criminal. That word made my chest tighten. I wasn't thinking about the money anymore. I was thinking about Susan. The promise I'd made beside her hospital bed. Take care of Daniel. How do you protect your son from himself? James seemed to read my thoughts. You don't have to decide today. But there's something else. He lowered his voice. Our fraud department noticed something unusual. What? The transfers stopped suddenly. There were authorization requests for another account. They were denied. I only have one retirement account. James slowly shook his head. No, Mr. Carter, you don't. He stood up, walked to a locked filing cabinet, unlocked it with a key, then removed an old manila folder. He placed it gently on the desk between us. This account hasn't had a withdrawal in 26 years. I stared at him. I don't remember opening another account. You didn't. It was opened jointly with your late wife. My heart skipped. Susan. James smiled softly. When she came here years ago, she asked for complete privacy. She specifically instructed us never to discuss this account with anyone except you. I looked at him in shock. My wife never told me. No, she left written instructions. If anything ever happened, you were to receive them personally. James slid the folder toward me. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was Susan's handwriting. Perfect. Neat. Exactly as I remembered it. Folded beside the letter was a statement. Current balance. Puzzle 486 327.91. I couldn't breathe. My wife had spent years quietly building a second retirement account, one I never knew existed. James looked at me carefully. Mr. Carter, I don't think your son ever knew this account existed. Slowly looked up. No, he didn't. For the first time that morning, I realized something. Daniel believed he had taken everything. But Susan, even after all these years, had left behind one final act of love and one secret that was about to change everything. I didn't open Susan's letter right away. I simply stared at her handwriting. 26 years. And somehow, it still felt like she'd written it yesterday. James quietly stood. I'll give you a few minutes. When the office door closed, I unfolded the letter. At the top, in blue ink, were 4 words that instantly brought tears to my eyes. My dearest Tommy. She hadn't called me Thomas since we were young. Only Susan called me Tommy. I smiled through the tears and began reading. If you're holding this letter, then something has happened that made James believe you needed to know about this account. I hope I'm wrong, but I know our son. Daniel has a beautiful heart, but sometimes he mistakes love for permission. He has always believed you'll rescue him, no matter what choices he makes. That's why I created this account without telling either of you. Not because I didn't trust you, because I wanted to protect you. One day, Daniel may confuse your kindness with weakness. If that day ever comes, promise me something. Don't save him from the consequences. Save him from becoming the kind of man who never faces them. Stopped reading. My eyes filled with tears. Susan had seen it, years before I ever did. She hadn't been protecting our money. She'd been protecting our son from himself. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back inside the envelope. James returned a few moments later. Are you all right? Smiled sadly. My wife still knows me better than anyone. He nodded. She sounds like an extraordinary woman. She was. James handed me another document. This account has one more feature. What feature? No one besides you can access it. No online banking, no power of attorney, no password sharing. Every withdrawal requires your physical signature inside this branch. Susan had thought of everything. I laughed quietly. She never liked technology. James smiled. Maybe she was wiser than the rest of us. Then his expression became serious. Mr. Carter, I need to ask you something. Go ahead. Does your son know your retirement account is empty? Yes. And does he know about this account? No. James leaned forward. I recommend keeping it that way. I frowned. Why? Because people reveal their true character. When they believe there's nothing left to gain. Those words stayed with me. Maybe for the first time in my life, I needed to stop protecting Daniel and simply watch who he chose to become. That evening, I drove home without calling him, without sending a text, without telling anyone about Susan's secret. As I pulled into my driveway, I noticed Daniel's black SUV already parked outside. He was waiting on my front porch. The moment I stepped out of my truck, he walked toward me carrying a folder. His smile looked forced. Dad, I've been thinking. I've got a solution. What kind of solution? He handed me the folder. Across the top, in bold letters, it read, Power of Attorney. I slowly looked back at my son. He smiled again. If you sign these, I can manage everything for you. You won't have to worry about money anymore. I stared into his eyes. Just hours after emptying my retirement, he wanted control of everything else. I smiled politely, then quietly said, Daniel, I'll read every single page. His smile grew wider. He thought I was about to trust him again. He had absolutely no idea. The man standing in front of him was no longer the same father who had always said yes. Daniel stood on my porch with a smile that looked rehearsed. He pointed to the folder in my hands. Just routine paperwork, Dad. It'll make things easier if anything ever happens. I looked down at the words, Power of Attorney printed across the front. 24 hours earlier, I would have signed it without reading a single page. That's how much I trusted my son. Not anymore. I looked back at him. When do you need it? He answered a little too quickly. Tomorrow would be great. I raised an eyebrow. Tomorrow? Yeah, my attorney wants everything finalized. Attorney. Interesting. Daniel had never hired an attorney without calling me first. I nodded. I'll have someone look it over. His smile disappeared for half a second. You don't trust me? I looked him straight in the eyes. I trust paper more than promises. For the first time, he didn't know what to say. That night, I drove to Rebecca Lawson's office. She had handled Susan's estate after she passed away. If there was anyone I trusted, it was Rebecca. She welcomed me with a warm smile. Thomas, it's been too long. It has. I handed her the folder. I need you to tell me exactly what my son wants me to sign. She opened the documents. At first, her face remained calm. Then her eyebrows slowly came together. By the third page, she stopped reading altogether. She looked up at me. Thomas, did Daniel tell you what this actually does? No. He said it would help me. Rebecca slowly removed her glasses. This isn't an ordinary power of attorney. It gives Daniel complete financial authority. Every bank account, every investment, every piece of property. He could legally sell your truck, refinance your home, empty your accounts, And unless you proved abuse in court, he could do most of it without asking your permission. I felt my chest tighten. He already emptied one account. Rebecca looked at me in disbelief. What? I told her everything. The retirement account, the transfers, Susan's hidden account, the letter. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair. Thomas, this isn't about helping you. This is about control. Rebecca reached into a drawer, pulled out another file. I've been debating whether I should tell you this. My stomach sank. What is it? 3 months ago, Daniel came to my office. I froze. He asked me to prepare documents declaring, "You mentally unfit to manage your finances." The room became perfectly silent. What? I refused. He didn't have a single medical report, no doctor's opinion, no legal basis. He simply said, she opened her notebook. My father is getting old and makes emotional decisions with money. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Daniel hadn't just stolen my retirement. He'd been planning this for months, maybe longer. Rebecca gently pushed the power of attorney papers back toward me. Thomas, if you'd signed these, you would have handed him everything. I drove home in complete silence. The folder sat on the passenger seat beside me. Every red light, every mile, one question kept repeating in my mind. When did my son stop seeing me as his father and start seeing me as an obstacle? As I turned onto my street, I noticed something unusual. Daniel's SUV was parked outside my house again. But this time he wasn't alone. Standing beside him was a man in an expensive gray suit, carrying a leather briefcase. Parked across the street, neither of them noticed me. The stranger smiled, shook Daniel's hand, and quietly said words I would never forget. Once your father signs tomorrow, the rest will be easy. I stayed inside my truck, watching from the darkness. At that moment I realized this was never just Daniel's idea. Someone else had been helping him all along. I stayed inside my truck. The porch light cast long shadows across the driveway. Daniel stood beside the man in the gray suit, speaking in low voices. I rolled my window down just enough to hear. The stranger opened his briefcase and handed Daniel a stack of papers. Daniel looked nervous. "What if he refuses to sign?" he asked. The man smiled. "Then you remind him he's 71, living alone, and needs someone to manage his affairs." Daniel nodded slowly. "And if that doesn't work?" The stranger shrugged. "Most elderly parents eventually give in." I felt something inside me break. Not because of the money, not because of the documents, because my own son was discussing me like I was a problem to be solved. I waited until the stranger drove away. Only then did I pull into the driveway. Daniel smiled the moment he saw me. "Dad, I've been waiting." I looked around. "Your friend left." "Oh, that was just my financial consultant." "Really? What was his name?" Daniel hesitated, then answered, "Mark. No last name, no explanation, just Mark." I unlocked my front door. Daniel followed me inside. "So did you read the papers?" "I did." His face brightened. "And?" "Set the folder on the kitchen table. I won't be signing them." The smile disappeared instantly. "What?" I said no. His jaw tightened. "Dad, you don't understand." "No, I understand perfectly. I understand that you emptied my retirement. I understand that you asked a lawyer to declare me mentally unfit. And I understand you brought a stranger to my house tonight to convince me to hand over everything else. Daniel's face turned white. Who told you that? I don't think that's the important question. For nearly 10 seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, he slammed his hand onto the table. I'm trying to save this family. No, I answered calmly. You're trying to save your business. There's a difference. His phone suddenly rang. He glanced at the screen, then immediately walked into the hallway. He thought I couldn't hear him. I know, no, he won't sign. We'll have to do it another way. My heart skipped. Another way? I quietly walked closer. Daniel lowered his voice even more. No, he doesn't know about the investors. He still thinks it's just me. Investors? What investors? He ended the call before I could hear anything else. When he came back into the kitchen, he forced another smile. Dad, let's not fight. I'll come back tomorrow. He grabbed his folder, walked toward the front door, then stopped. Without turning around, he quietly said, I really hope you change your mind. The front door closed behind him. 10 minutes later, my phone rang. It was James Holloway, the bank manager. His voice sounded unusually urgent. Mr. Carter, I'm sorry to call this late, but I think you need to know something. What happened? Our fraud department traced where your retirement money went. I gripped the phone tighter. It wasn't used to expand your son's business. What do you mean? James took a deep breath. Most of the money never stayed in Daniel's company. It was transferred again to 3 private investors. And tomorrow morning, they're expecting one final payment. How much? James paused, then quietly answered, Almost $2 million. I froze. Daniel hadn't stolen my retirement to save his company. He'd promised investors money he didn't even have. And suddenly, Susan's hidden account made perfect sense. Because if Daniel ever discovered it, he wouldn't stop at $800,000. He'd come back for every last penny. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard the same number, $2 million. Daniel hadn't stolen my retirement because he was desperate. He'd stolen it because he'd already promised other people money that wasn't his. And if those investors didn't get paid, someone was going to come looking for him, maybe for me too. At 8 o'clock the next morning, I was back inside James Holloway's office. He closed the blinds before speaking. I stayed late last night. I wanted to know exactly where your money went. He turned his monitor toward me. 3 companies, 3 wire transfers, 3 different states. But something caught my eye immediately. Each company had the same mailing address, one office building, Dallas, Texas. James pointed to the screen. Those aren't real investment firms. What are they? Shell companies. They exist on paper, but they don't actually do business. People often use them to hide who really controls the money. So my son has been scammed. James looked at me for a long moment. I honestly don't know. He could be a victim, or he could be involved. Those words hit harder than I expected. Before I left, James handed me another document. We recovered this from one of the wire requests. I looked down. At the bottom of the page, someone had signed as witness. Not Daniel. Another name. Mark Reynolds. The same man I'd seen outside my house. So he wasn't just a financial consultant. He was involved from the beginning. As I drove home, my phone rang. Rebecca Lawson. Thomas, I've been looking into Mark Reynolds. And he isn't licensed as a financial advisor. My hands tightened around the steering wheel. 5 years ago, he declared bankruptcy. 3 years later, he became involved in 2 civil lawsuits involving elderly investors. Were charges filed? No, every case settled quietly. I felt cold. So Daniel trusted a man like that? Rebecca answered softly. I don't think Daniel checked. I think he saw someone promising fast money and stopped asking questions. When I pulled into my driveway, Daniel was already there again. This time he wasn't angry. He looked exhausted. His shirt was wrinkled. His eyes were red. He walked toward my truck before I'd even turned off the engine. Dad, we need to talk. I stepped out. I'm listening. He looked around nervously, then lowered his voice. I made a mistake. I thought the investment was guaranteed. They promised we'd triple the money in 6 months. And now? They're demanding the rest. I looked him straight in the eyes. How much do they think you still owe? He swallowed hard. 1.2 million. My heart sank. So that's why you wanted power of attorney. He looked away. I didn't know what else to do. You are going to steal the rest. Tears filled his eyes. I kept telling myself I'd pay you back. I never wanted to hurt you, I answered quietly. But you did. Just then, a black SUV slowly pulled up in front of my house, the same one I'd seen 2 nights earlier. Mark Reynolds stepped out. He smiled as if we were old friends. Then he looked directly at me. So you must be Thomas Carter. He extended his hand. I am afraid your son has created a rather expensive problem. I didn't shake his hand. Instead, I asked the only question that mattered. Tell me something, Mark. How many fathers have you done this to before me? For the first time, his smile disappeared. Mark Reynolds slowly lowered his hand. The smile that had been on his face moments earlier was gone. He studied me carefully. Then he laughed. You're sharper than Daniel said. I crossed my arms. I asked you a question. How many fathers have you done this to before me? Mark shrugged. I don't force anyone to sign anything. I simply present opportunities. I looked at Daniel. His head was hanging low. For the first time, he looked less like a businessman and more like a frightened little boy. Mark reached into his jacket, pulled out a folder, then calmly placed it on the hood of my truck. Mr. Carter, your son owes my partners $1,200,000. The payment is already overdue. I don't owe your partners a single penny. No, you don't. But your son thought you would. Daniel closed his eyes. Dad, I'm sorry. I truly believed I'd make the money back before you ever noticed. I looked at him. That's the problem. You stopped asking what was right and only cared about what was possible. Mark interrupted. We're wasting time. He slid another document toward me. 1 signature. That's all this takes. I glanced at the paper. It wasn't a loan. It wasn't an investment. It was an agreement, giving Mark's company a lien against my home and every asset connected to my name. I laughed quietly. Mark frowned. Something funny? Very. He narrowed his eyes. You don't seem worried. I was. Yesterday. But today I know something you don't. For the first time, he looked uncertain, reached into my jacket, pulled out Rebecca Lawson's business card, then another document. James Holloway had printed it that morning. It listed every transfer, every shell company, every account number, every witness signature, including Mark Reynolds. I handed him the papers. His face changed instantly. What is this? A complete fraud investigation. It'll be in Rebecca's office within the hour. And before sunset, it'll also be with federal investigators. Daniel looked up in shock. Dad, you called the authorities? I looked at my son. No, I protected you. Then I looked back at Mark. But I'm done protecting him. For the first time, Mark wasn't smiling. He quietly gathered the papers he'd brought. This doesn't have to become legal. Shook my head. It already is. He took one slow step closer. You have no idea who you're dealing with. I smiled. No, I know exactly who I'm dealing with. A man who built his business by convincing desperate people to gamble money that wasn't theirs. And today, you picked the wrong family. Mark turned around without another word, climbed into his SUV, and drove away. Daniel stood frozen in the driveway, watching the vehicle disappear. After nearly a minute, he whispered, I think they're going to destroy me. I looked at him quietly. No, Daniel, they didn't destroy you. You started destroying yourself the moment you believed stealing from your father was easier than telling him the truth. Tears rolled down his face. I don't know how to fix this. Placed a hand on his shoulder. For the first time in your life, you don't need another shortcut. You need to face the consequences. Just then Rebecca called. Her voice was calm. Thomas, I've just received something from the Securities Fraud Division. They've been investigating Mark Reynolds for over 2 years. I froze. What did you say? They were waiting for one final witness, and I think that witness is your son. Slowly looked at Daniel. He had no idea that the decision he made in the next 5 minutes would determine the rest of his life. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Daniel stared at the ground. His shoulders shook. Testify, he whispered. Rebecca's voice came through the phone. If he's willing to cooperate immediately, the prosecutors will consider him a victim who became part of the fraud instead of the mastermind. Daniel looked at me. Dad, I'll tell them everything. I nodded. It's time. 3 days later, we walked into the federal building together, not as a businessman and his investor, not even as father and son, just 2 men finally telling the truth. Daniel spent nearly 6 hours answering questions. He handed over emails, contracts, wire transfers, text messages, even voice recordings Mark Reynolds had sent him. By sunset, federal agents had enough evidence to obtain search warrants. Within 48 hours, Mark Reynolds was arrested. Investigators later discovered he'd been running the same scheme for nearly 12 years. He targeted small business owners, retirees, and especially adult children desperate to become wealthy overnight. More than 60 families had lost everything. Daniel wasn't the first, but he became the man whose testimony finally stopped it. 2 months later, the court ordered the remaining money frozen. Not all of my retirement was recovered, but enough came back to rebuild my future. The rest, insurance and restitution, would eventually cover. James Holloway personally called me. "Mr. Carter, I've been in banking for 34 years. I've never seen a father handle something like this the way you did." "What do you mean?" "You protected your son without protecting his mistakes." I smiled. I learned that from my wife. Daniel came to my house every Sunday after that, not to ask for money, not to talk about business, just to spend time together. One afternoon, he handed me a small wooden box. I found this while cleaning my office. Inside was the old firefighter's badge I'd worn on my very first day of duty. I'd thought it was lost forever. I was going to sell it years ago, Daniel admitted quietly. I figured it was just old metal. He looked down. I'm ashamed I ever thought that. I picked up the badge, ran my thumb across the worn numbers, then smiled. "It's worth a lot more than money." He nodded. I finally understand. 6 months later, Daniel sold what remained of his business. Not because he had to, because he wanted a fresh start. He accepted a management job at a local construction company. A normal paycheck. An honest living. One evening, as we sat on my porch watching the sunset, he quietly asked, "Dad, after everything I did, why didn't you give up on me?" I looked toward the mountains Susan loved so much, then answered honestly, "Because your mother asked me to protect you." He lowered his head. I failed her. Gently shook mine. "No, you lost your way. There's a difference." He wiped away a tear. "I'll spend the rest of my life earning your trust back." I smiled. "You already started." That night, I opened Susan's letter one last time. At the very bottom, below everything I'd already read, was one sentence I'd somehow missed. "Real wealth isn't the money we leave our children. It's the character they discover after they've lost it." Folded the letter carefully, placed it back into its envelope, and looked at the family photo on the fireplace. I had spent 43 years believing my greatest achievement was saving money for retirement. I was wrong. My greatest achievement was giving my son one final chance to become the man his mother always believed he could be. The end